Hello and welcome, my fellow legates and civilians. I am Joe, here with me is my co-host Dan,
Hail!
and we are now going to be discussing the next episode of Rome. The first episode was a shaky start. The second episode, in terms of historic events, there's not much. I'm just saying. You've got the conspiracy by Pompeius Magnus to drag down Caesar, declare him hostis or hostile, and ultimately destroy him politically. But you have, in turn, Caesar is trying to negotiate as best he could before time runs out on his term for some sort of settlement. And the reality was that, in a way, Caesar did not draw first blood. He was honestly pushed into his position. As the Senate, over the course of several years, pushed for more and more severe action against him, even as he technically officially remained very loyal and pious towards the Senate. And the Senate became ever more adamantly against him, even as he waged what was essentially a very, very popular war. We have to bear in mind that last time we spoke of the questionable legality of the war, there was a questionable legalness to it. But on the other hand, it was a very popular war, as it enriched Rome and it brought glory to the nation. Glory that had not been seen in 150 years, because Rome, for the most part, had suffered setbacks, civil wars. Well, actually, it'd be closer to say 100 years thereabouts, with the Macedonians and the last bit of Carthage wiped away. So you had 100 years of ignominy. Mithridates VI was allowed to do whatever he wanted until he wasn't, but even that was almost a anticlimactic affair. So the Romans had not had the kind of glorious victories that they knew they could have under the Scipios. Marius's wars were big affairs, but they were not the kind of glory we're talking about. Vercingetorix was the first one to really kind of back up a Roman general into a corner and then to be defeated. As even Mithridates and the wars in Africa had not pushed the Roman generals that led the war efforts against them quite so far. And when I say the Roman generals, I mean the big guys. For example, Mithridates did a lot of damage in Asia Minor, but he was pushed back. And then eventually Pompeius Magnus did win a good, steady victory on him. But still, by then Mithridates was already on the decline. So Caesar is really a very glorious general at this point. He's the most popular guy. He's the greatest man alive in the Mediterranean. But more than that, he was a patriot. Let us understand it in those terms. He had done something very patriotic. I am not saying it means what he did was right in Gaul. I actually kind of lean, to an extent, a little against him. But I also kind of understand where he was coming from to an extent. It's a complicated thing, the conquest of Gaul. But on the other hand, Caesar was not in the right to slaughter as many as he did. But on the other hand, he did it for his nation and for his own glory. But to the Roman people, they saw it as their own glory was tied in with his. And the Senate, by attacking Caesar the way they did, were also attacking the plebs. And in this episode, you see the patricians just holding themselves above their people and saying, ugh, the plebs. We're all men of substance. We're not like them. For all intents and purposes, they say that. And so, if you were alive back then and were a pleb, you would probably take more Caesar's side. You'd see it as, you know what? Why would I support whatever the Senate supports? They hate us. It is their ancestors who murdered the Gracchi brothers. It is them who started the Civil War. It is their sword who turned against us and have never done any good for us. So in that regard, politically at the time, it was very much a conflict between the nobility and the peasants. Oftentimes such conflicts begin that way. And in a way, the conflict never ended. But on the other hand, this episode sees Vorenus and Pullo return home as they are acting as the escort to Marcus Antonius. Marcus Antonius in this episode is probably the funniest character here, with Pullo kind of teasing and picking on Vorenus a little, just outside the city, and Vorenus begging that they talk about something else and reminding Pullo that they're under the standard, at which point Pullo asks, well, what about him? Because Marcus Antonius is acting much more obscenely than Titus Pullo. To which Vorenus says, well, he's not under the standard, meaning literally. So Marcus Antonius gets a pass. And Antonius ends up carrying his misbehavior into the city of Rome, behaves himself for about a day because he's got a religious ritual to guarantee him his status as tribune of the plebs, then goes to a meeting in secret with the senators who are aligned against Caesar. Et ce qui arrive, c'est que you have this conflict between them, and Antonius reminds them snows always melt. And that certainly Caesar's, the majority of his forces are on the other side of the Alps, or I think there were some positioned in Spain. But snows always melt. And so Caesar could easily call them forth when the time comes. And Magnus Pompey ends up deciding, well, Pompeius Magnus, sorry about that, ends up deciding, well, he's weak. No. And in this episode, they don't portray Cicero very well. Actually, this entire series portrays him as a buffoon, for the most part, which is not accurate. Historically, he was a political juggernaut, in some ways able to dominate many of the senators around him quite as capably as Caesar often did. And he was one of the few men who could resist Caesar's charm and see him for what he was. But on the other hand, the two men occasionally had a tenuous friendship. It was complicated. Cicero was also someone who didn't necessarily look down on everyone who was not a senator. He was very much a complicated man, a very nuanced one. He had a deep-seated friendship with Atticus, which I wish they would have shown so that we could see his pen pal. Like, you could have had a few episodes, or maybe even the narration of the series, at the beginning of every episode and the end of every episode, with Cicero and Atticus exchanging letters about the actual event. And you could have the actual letters from history read. What would you have said to that?
That would have been a very fascinating frame narrative.
Yeah, where you're, in a way, you're seeing the series, in a way, on the macro level, from the point of views of Cicero and Atticus, at least until the rise of the Principate. But they didn't do that, and I actually disagree with that creative decision. That being said, the two Roman soldiers arrive in the city, escort Octavius to his home, and Octavia is still married to NPC character who was not historic. And there's a bad relationship between mother and daughter where you're meant to look down on Octavia for being pitiful and weak. This is not accurate. Attia also has an affair with Marcus Antonius, as said last time. This is not accurate. That's not accurate. Vorenus and Pullo are funny, because of course they are. And then later, Pullo gets into a bar brawl, gets injured, goes to Vorenus, who is having marital problems because his wife cheated on him, had a son, and she's lying to him. And on some level, he knows she's lying to him. And he name-called her in public, to be polite. And he's having troubles fitting in with his daughters, who are a bit nervous around him. And he's struggling and trying to accept that his daughters are almost all grown up without him. And you can see a bit of grief in his eyes over this, and that he's missed all their moments because he was too busy going to work as a soldier. This is something that a lot of soldiers over the course of history have had to deal with. And this is a very tragic side to the soldiering career. They don't have 9 to 5. They often are deployed and sometimes don't come home for years. So they never get to know their family. And they do it for others in a lot of cases. On the other hand, there are soldiers who are brutes and don't deserve their families. Like, with everything, it's nuanced. But Varinus is someone who is suffering quite a bit. And he also has, it's implied, some minor war trauma, which, given how violent the period was, yeah. Niobe, for her part, is traumatized because she was basically violated by her brother-in-law, then had to sell herself to him in order to secure finances for her daughters, because the paymaster, or basically the post guy, the postman was basically stealing the money and not exchanging letters. Slime. And Niobe was basically screwed over in multiple ways and was forced to bear a child she didn't actually want.
She was in a no-win position.
Yeah. So basically there's much misery to go around. And she confides her woes to Pullo, whom, after a brief operation, is resting at the home and acting almost like a nanny for the baby, and is very taken with the child, as Pullo's a bit of a... Well, he's a guy who likes kids. He's just not good with women for the most part. And I say he's not good with them because he's not always nice to them. Well, hey, he's Barney Stinson, Roman flavored. So, which makes him a little French in some ways. I'm joking. I couldn't resist that joke. Actually, no, not at all. Ray Stevenson plays him to perfection in this episode. I love Ray Stevenson as an actor. Shame he passed. But Pullo acts as confidant, and it's interesting that a lot of people confide in Pullo. He's like a loyal dog in some ways, not in a bad way, but just he's loyal, and there's something almost canine about him that makes people just warm up to him. I found that a very interesting aspect of the character. Niobe confides that she's miserable with Varinus. Pullo defends Varinus, and then Varinus, who overheard everything, apologizes to Niobe and says, we'll talk when I get back. And they go out. And the guy who attacked Pullo the other night, or he ended up in a bar brawl, I should say, it's complicated, tries to attack Pullo. Pullo cuts him down, and a battle in the Forum begins with Antonius leaving. Historically, I do believe Antonius did choose to flee from Rome. Things did not go over very well, and so Caesar had his excuse to march. But to an extent, no matter what he did, he had no other choice but to march. The Senate was so determined to destroy him that they would have had him slain. He was either a rebel or he was a dead man. And his legionnaires would never have gotten a single pension unless they went on to fight for other incompetent men, which meant possibly dying in the field of battle. Ultimately, their fortunes were tied with Caesar's, and so they had no other choice but to follow Caesar. The minute they left for Gaul, arguably, their fortunes were tied to him. Their fates were tied to his. And so the Senate was not simply declaring war on Caesar, but all his legions, which was a very foolish thing, as they split their nation in half. And this was avoidable. They need only have negotiated. But this is always the problem with those who are like Cato. Catonians throughout history have always sought to undermine every potential threat and turn even the most non-threatening of individuals into threats. And the truth of the matter is, Caesar welcomes Antonius as a conquering hero almost, and rewards Titus Pullo, though he probably shouldn't have, considering the whole mess is Pullo's fault, at least in the series. Historically, this was not accurate. But, yeah, so let's rate this episode.
Well, it's a good. I actually really like Caesar's speech at the end.
Okay, how would you rate it?
Good 3.
Yeah, the history in this episode isn't entirely accurate. Well, the production design is perfect. The history, a lot of the events didn't exactly happen like this, and let us be honest, not much. Like, they had to invent drama in the episode, but the drama they did invent was really, 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 really good. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned from writing here. And in the other video of episode 2 of Chosen, we were told, yeah, well, The Chosen has 440 million views worldwide. Yes. And just because something gets a lot of views doesn't always make it very good. But it also does not mean it's bad. And arguably, the Rome series is a better series, creatively and critically, in my opinion. But on the other hand, it's also better historically. And there's also arguably not as much of an agenda historically as there is a bit of a religious agenda to the Chosen series, which weirdly, if they set a bit of that aside for some of the scenes, they'd actually get the religious messaging across better, because it'd be more entertaining, more palatable. But on the other hand, it is what it is. And it is generally, after episode 4, in episode 4 it was very enjoyable. Now, it's taken Chosen 4 episodes to become enjoyable. Rome did it in 2. So I'm just saying there's some lessons to be learned. Now, if people take offense at this, fine. But the truth of the matter is, this is a really well-made series. Probably the best made Roman TV drama. Although both pale in comparison to the movie Centurion, which was obviously a lot better than both.
Oh, yes. That goes without question.
I'm partially kidding, but actually, there's a movie we should perhaps just watch or do an entire scene-by-scene podcast of. I love that movie so much. I actually wish that production team had gone on to make a murder mystery or something of Rome. That would have been a great series. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, and even enjoyed our Chosen video, which, honestly, we're liking both series right now, I think. So, do feel free to smash that like and that subscribe button, and have yourselves a very great, very Roman day.